Minister for Defence, Dr. Ng Eng Hen.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to reply to Members of Parliament's cuts. I'll try to answer as many of the questions that you have put. Some, while the others will be replied to by my senior ministers of state. Mr. Chairman, I state the obvious when I say that battling COVID-19 has been the central preoccupation of governments and their citizens all over the world the last 2 years, including Singapore. If you think about it, very few events have that power and reach. In recent history, I think World War II did, and that shared experience defined that affected generation. If you compare it, COVID-19 is not as devastating as World War II, but many years on, I suspect, will likely linger in the memories of all those who lived through it. But despite the singular challenge of this century, COVID-19, there is no respite, no temporary cessation of other challenges that pose security threats to Singapore, as some MPs have observed. My ministry and the SAF have remained very focused on the security environment, even as we went into the trenches to join the whole of government in our fight against COVID-19. The SAF's core purpose, first and foremost, must remain to protect Singapore from all potential external aggressors. Mr. Vikram Nair alluded to this, Mr. Dennis Tan too as well. And because we are a small country with less space, figuratively and literally, to react, we need to recognize these threats early. For Singapore's survival and well-being, the SAF not only needs to be always prepared to plan long-term and be well organized, but also nimble to change if we are to prevent or ward off imminent danger. Therefore, despite our efforts to fight COVID-19, MINDEF and the SAF have continued to plan in earnest so that we build the next generation SAF that is not only capable of meeting today's security threats, but anticipating tomorrow's too. And I think that must be our approach. There will always be the unexpected threats, just like COVID-19. But the better the SAF is structured to deal with the known threats, the more bandwidth it has to deal with the unknown unknowns. And I will deal with some of these initiatives later on, which members have asked for. But first, let me put MINDEF's budget this year in context. This year, my ministry will increase our spending relative to the past 2 years. Mr. Sean Huang asked about this. And that increase is due to the resumption of projects, training, and exercises which were disrupted by COVID-19 over the past 2 years. I should underscore that we continued to purchase and acquire new platforms despite COVID-19. But suppliers were also affected, causing delays. So, for example, deliveries of the RSAF H225 medium lift and Chinook 47F heavy lift helicopters were delayed by about half a year, by a couple of months. No, I'm sorry, longer than that, from end 20 to March and May 2021. Respectively. Delivery of our Invincible-class submarines, initially planned for last year, has also been delayed. For this year and beyond, projects deferred or delayed will resume, as will the acquisition of new platforms. Members have asked about training. Mr. Don Wee, Mr. Desmond Chu, Mr. Dennis Tan, Mr. Sean Huang. The SAF expects to increase numbers of training, both locally and overseas, to reach pre-COVID levels later this year. Last year, we indeed had fewer overseas exercises and with less troops. For example, exercise Forging Sabre in the US with 800 personnel, exercise Wallaby in Australia with around 580 personnel, much less than we did in pre-COVID levels. At home, NS training has progressively returned to normalcy, and in-camp training call-up rates are on track to reach pre-COVID levels this year. With the planned resumption of both projects and training to pre-COVID levels in the coming financial year, we are projecting an expenditure of $16.3 billion. This translates to an increase of 6.5%, which is expected to be one-off and a catch-up for the reduced spending for FYs 2020 and 2021. COVID-19 resulted in sharp dips and spikes, but over the next 5 years, MINDEF's budget is expected to keep pace with inflation, or 3 to 4% nominal growth each year, which I have assured this House previously. The reduction in spending over the last 2 years did not occur at the expense of readiness. Members have asked about this, Mr. Vikram Nair, Mr. Dennis Tan. Indeed, the SAF was able to operate at a high level of readiness and conduct critical operations amidst the pandemic. Soldiers within units were disciplined and kept to strict health and safety protocols, such as health screening for all recruits and instructors, training in smaller groups where possible, temperature taking, testing. And testing included returning NS men for their ICTs every 7 days. Of our MINDEF SAF personnel, 99.7% are vaccinated and 91% have received their booster shot. And I think that has helped us keep our infections at bay. I said that we were determined to keep building up the next generation SAF. And Mr. Henry Kwek and Mr. Desmond Chu asked for updates. Let me provide some details. The formidable class frigates, first commissioned in 2007, are now 15 years and due for their midlife upgrade. They are our key fighting platforms for maritime strike, anti-air, and anti-submarine warfare. But the midlife upgrade, as we do for all platforms, will be more than just addition and alterations, if I can use a construction term. Because each time we do a midlife upgrade, we look at the technology that has evolved, our manpower, the design, and including artificial intelligence if we can. So after the upgrade, the frigate's combat capabilities will increase and be equipped with better combat management, communication systems, weapon systems, along with improved maintenance processes, basically to use less to achieve more. The next generation SAF, which Mr. Desmond Chu asked about too, will have more unmanned systems across the three services. The RSAF has acquired the Orbiter 4 close-range unmanned aerial vehicle, and with their smaller size, capable sensors, and increased portability, these can be used for a wide range of operations in peace and combat. This year, our Navy will deploy the first tranche of maritime security unmanned surface vessels to patrol the local waters. The RSN will also replace its mine countermeasure vessels with a fully unmanned system from 2027 onwards. We are among the first few navies in the world to operate unmanned maritime systems. These systems were designed and integrated locally by DSO and DSTA and the RSN. DSO and DSTA are critical enablers. DSO celebrates its 50th anniversary this year. We are immensely proud of and grateful for the men and women of DSO, who for the past 5 decades have worked hard behind the scenes to provide game-changing defense technologies and solutions that transform the SAF into today's modern fighting machine. Some members remembered that the last year's Committee of Supply, I spoke about the inauguration of the Army Headquarters Sense and Strike. And the HQSS was able to participate for the first time in Exercise Forging Sabre late last year. The Army will also operationalize the first Hunter Armored Brigade Group later this month. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to display an image on the screens.
Please do.
The next generation SAF is taking shape. You can already see its new form, now in Kuwait, but with greater definition as each year passes. By 2040, the Army, equipped with the next generation infantry battalions and new armored track carriers and howitzers, will be more maneuverable, able to strike faster and harder. The Navy, with multi-role combat vessels, Invincible class submarines and unmanned vessels will be able to see and strike further at sea and in the depths to better protect our waters and our sea lines of communication. The next generation Air Force with F-15s, F-35s, and the next generation UAVs will be more lethal, versatile, and effective to better protect our skies. This next generation SAF will provide for this and the next generation, for our children and theirs, greater confidence in dealing with potential aggressors to fulfill the SAF's core mission. Many members have asked how we navigate the increasing complex geopolitical situations and rivalries. I'm afraid no country has magic formula, no Aladdin's lamp that you can make wishes from. Our philosophy is a simple one. We make friends with all countries and seek no enemies. But we are realists too, and keen observers of history and events around us, and especially what happens to small, vulnerable states. We saw how Kuwait, an oil-rich state, was invaded by Iraq in 1990. We observed how Qatar suffered an air, land, and sea blockade imposed by its neighbors in 2017, not so long ago. And at this very moment, we witness Ukrainians deeply troubled as they ponder their futures balanced on a knife edge. The unthinkable and unimaginable has occurred. Their cities are under bombardment and with foreign troops. Their way of life, their dreams are shattered. Their independence and freedom are under peril. Ukraine, with a population of over 40 million, is not a small country, but size and might is relative. For them, Kuwaitis and Qataris, these moments are about life and death, freedom of subjugation. Indeed, we live by the dictum that the stronger the SAF, the easier it is to make friends and have fewer enemies. No one will defend Singapore as robustly if Singaporeans do not or cannot. But if we are able to build up the kind of SAF that I've just shown on this infographic by 2040, can we be satisfied that collectively as leaders in the government and members of this House that we have discharged our duties honorably and with satisfaction to our children's generation? Some here looking at this chart might say yes, because that kind of SAF is impressive. I think our founding fathers could not envisage that we would come quite far. It will certainly be among the most modern and better equipped militaries in the region. But my honest answer is almost there, but not quite. Because as good and as ambitious as the next generation SAF is, there are some gaps in capabilities which recent events and developments warned us against. And I'm glad that the members of this House have warned us too, Mr. Vikram Nair, Mr. Sean Huang, Mr. Patrick Tay. And I'm talking primarily about threats in the digital domain. And I'd like to show, you notice in this infographic there's a piece missing, right? So I'm going to fill that missing piece in the center. To complete that SAF 2040, we will need a fourth service to complement the existing three services. I'll spend some time elaborating on this significant move, as the reasons are important. Let's characterize the digital threat first in broad general terms to know what countries, including Singapore, are up against. The digital terrain has become as real as the land, air, and sea domains for which we have raised the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy. I think no one here doubts that. In fact, some would argue that for the next generations, the digital domain is the dominant domain, so much so that a new word, metaverse, has been coined for that virtual universe. Threats that emanate in the digital domain can readily impact events in the real physical world. That divide between virtual and physical, in security terms, is a false one, as the two are in fact intricately interwoven. Again, I don't think anyone here would gainsay this. We already have real-life examples that exemplify this truth, and members have quoted it. Fuel shortages across the US East Coast last May due to ransomware attack on the Colonial Pipeline. Iranians could not top up their gas in petrol stations last October because the payment systems were hacked. There have also been clear examples of countries or non-state entities like terrorist groups that use a combination of attacks through both the digital and physical domains. I first spoke about this type of hybrid warfare 7 years ago in my 2015 COS speech. But over the past few years, there have been many more examples of this type of campaigns. Even now, we are witnessing with our own eyes that kind of campaign in Ukraine. The Financial Times reported it with the headline, "Ukraine shores up cyber defenses," quote unquote. And this was in February 14th, so recent, quite recent. Let me make some relevant quotes which provide vividly what to expect in this kind of attack. Quote, "The country has been under constant attack since 2014. Cyber espionage, damage to databases and servers, disruption to powers and communications, and disinformation are all part of the playbook. The Ukraine government and independent experts expect hostile cyber activity to increase in an effort to destabilize the country before or during any physical attack." Another quote, "There are bound to have been many more attacks over the years that we don't know about and that have left malware embedded in systems ready to be activated." This was a quote from Professor Subramaniam, who is a professor of computer science at Northwestern University in the US. He adds, "It's a bit like a bomb being planted in your house. It's benign until someone sets it off." Another quote, "Ukraine, meanwhile, suffers from a deficit of public sector cybersecurity expertise, weak regulation, limited response capabilities, and a lack of coordination between various agencies." I think all of members would agree with me here that we can learn from this unfortunate situation. And far better to learn and adjust now, because if we wait and change only after an attack on ourselves, I think the cost is going to be very high. When we look at all these incidents in the digital domain, what then should our response be? Fortunately, our intelligence sources have not identified such orchestrated attempts to subvert or subjugate Singapore using hybrid means. But of course, that does not mean that the threat will never come. So I think we best prepare now with a longer runway. And for the SAF, a clear-cut response is a fourth service. Internally, over the past decade, MINDEF SAF has progressively built up what we call the C4I, Command, Control, Communications, Computers, and Intelligence. We built up that community to enhance our resilience of our networks and systems. We set up the Defense Cyber Organization in 2017 to coordinate cybersecurity across the defense sector. And members of parliament have filed questions, and I've given you updates, and some of you have asked for updates even at this COS. The C4I community and its predecessor, the MIO, Military Intelligence Organizations, and the Joint C4 have been supporting elements to the three other services for over 20 years. However, the demands and direct responsibilities on the intelligence community for both threats in the digital and physical world would have risen sharply. So if you take terrorism, for example, the role of the C4I community is not only supportive, but a direct responsibility. You'll remember that when 9/11 occurred, it was characterized as a failure in intelligence. Shortly thereafter, members might recall that decisive actions by ISD based on good intelligence foiled a Jamaah Islamiyah plot to launch terrorist attacks in Singapore. The formation of a new service for the C4I community will greatly facilitate their mission focus, sharpen direct responsibility and accountability, and capability development. The human resource is particularly important for the intelligence services, and having a service status, just like Army, Navy, and Air Force, will enhance recruitment and career prospects considerably. The evolution of the C4I community into a new fourth service will integrate and expand our capabilities in the digital domain. But we will need more than that to deal effectively with digital threats from external aggressors that we expect will grow in numbers, sophistication, and organization. To achieve this, we will need not only an intelligence force, but a dedicated digital force. The current DCO is building up such a force, but is insufficient for the SAF's expanding needs and mandate. Figuratively, if the digital force is now a battalion force, we actually need a few brigades, perhaps even a division-sized force. MINDEF and the SAF have been considering these changes for some time now, exploring various options to better prepare for threats in the digital domain. Our conclusion is a new fourth service, the Digital and Intelligence Service, or DIS, best encapsulates this fourth arm of the SAF. The DIS should not and cannot be just like the Army, Air Force, and Navy with similar troops operating in the digital domain instead of the physical domain. The nature of the digital domain and threats therein require different skill sets, missions, mindsets, what we call tactics, techniques, and procedures. I think that's intuitive to most. The SAF envisages that the type of soldiers we recruit for the DIS service, their training, their force structure will be different. But some traits must be maintained for soldiers across the four services. The adherence to SAF core values, the operational mindsets, the resilience that lead to mission success, and above all, a commitment to the shared mission to enhance Singapore's security and peace. Technology, especially related to IT and communications, will play a big role for the DIS. But it will also require a force with specializations, not only in core IT areas and comms, but in diverse areas, including data science, psychology, linguistics, anthropology, and geography, that will help them understand the motivation and means in which orchestrated state and non-state groups aim to harm Singapore. The addition to this fourth service, the DIS, will allow the SAF to better train and fight as a network, integrated, and expanded force to deal with the spectrum of threats that we know exist today, but also the digital domain that we know will increase in the future. Other countries have also come to the same conclusion and added the digital force to their TRISE services. Germany, for example, has established the Cyber and Information Domain Service, consolidating its Communication and Information Systems Command and Geoinformation Center. There are many procedures to undertake to set up the fourth service, the DIS. Notwithstanding this, we expect to set it up by the last quarter of this year. NS men form the backbone of the SAF on air, land, air, sea, and in the future, also our digital domain. Whatever our plans, ultimately, it is the quality and commitment of our NS men that will determine whether the SAF can succeed. This year marks the 55th anniversary of NS, and as we have previously done, we will have a number of events to recognize their contributions. We'll put out more details in the coming month. But we also want to make improvements to our NS system. These new initiatives are from the NS Review Committee, which some members have asked about, and which I announced, which are chaired by the Deputy Secretary of Administration of MINDEF and the Chief of Army. 3 key changes are proposed. First, to optimize our precious manpower resource, we will now use functional assessments as part of the pre-enlistment medical screening. I think Mr. Lim Biao Chuan and Muhammad Fahmi asked about this. What is functional assessment? Compared to general physical assessments, functional assessments are a more precise gauge of whether the servicemen can perform specific locations. At the same time, we've redesigned 1,000 jobs so that more servicemen can contribute in areas they are not previously eligible for. Second, make-up pay. And this has been a long-standing issue. I'm happy to announce that better data management across government services, agencies, will now allow claims of make-up pay to be streamlined, and yes, the magic word, automated. Streamlined and automated. There will be a default base NS pay which NS men can claim for in-camp training. This will be especially useful for those in informal employment and training. The base NS pay is set at 1,006 per month and prorated for the duration of the NS call-ups. Over 100,000 NS men and 25,000 employers will benefit from the automated make-up pay and base NS pay. Third, we will increase the NS Home Awards with higher cash components, an extra 2,000 in cash to each national serviceman. SMS Heng will provide more details on these changes as well as several others. This four-service next-generation SAF with committed and capable NS men will better position Singapore to deal with both conventional and emerging threats. Our deterrence depends on a strong next-generation SAF. That is the main prong. But another prong is good relations, which many members have talked about, particularly defense relations with like-minded partners. Mr. Ang Wei Neng, Mr. Saktiandi asked about our approach. As a small country, Singapore needs as many friends as we can have. Having a strong network of defense partners have allowed us to build up our defense capabilities, train overseas, and cooperate on strategic issues critical to our security. In the past year, we maintained high-level defense engagements. For example, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, made his intro visit in July, and we concluded an MOU concerning cooperation in cyberspace with the U.S. DoD in August. With China, I met Minister Feng Weihe virtually in June. The RSN held joint naval exercises with the PLA via a contactless modality twice last year. With India, we signed an MOU in January for the SAF to conduct weapon firings in India's Chandapur Integrated Test Range. We renewed the Singapore-Vietnam Defense Cooperation Agreement in February. And we've also concluded new defense cooperation agreements with a few Baltic states to institutionalize our professional exchanges. This is interesting. We decided that the Baltic states were of interest, and this happened before Ukraine. Now we're even more interested, so I think that cooperation will bear more fruit. Closer to home, we conducted exercise Safka Indopura with the Indonesian Army in November, the first physical exercise between our Navy and a foreign counterpart. In January, Indonesian Defense Minister Prabowo Subianto and I signed a joint statement on our agreement to bring into force the 2007 Defense Cooperation Agreement and its implementing arrangement between the SAF and the Indonesian Armed Forces for the military training area in Indonesia. Mr. Henry Kwek asked what the implication of this. The DCA will strengthen the strategic relationship between our defense establishment and promote closer interaction and cooperation between our armed forces. Mr. Zulkarnain asked of our approach to ADMM Plus and ADMM. It is indeed the de facto multilateral defense grouping in Asia, and we've taken the lead on tackling threats in the cyber and information domains by establishing the ADMM Cybersecurity and Information Center of Excellence, which now provides monthly reports for all ASEAN member states. Similarly, the SAF's Counterterrorism Information Facility has been in operation since 2020, and 11 foreign liaison officers are stationed there. And the CTI produces timely and actionable counterterrorism intelligence. I'm also pleased that this year the Shangri-La Dialogue will resume in June after a 2 years hiatus physically. Mr. Chairman, let me also update members on SAF's and MINDEF's major green initiatives, which member Don Wee has asked about, which I announced last COS, to reduce the growth of overall emissions by two-thirds by 2030. The SAF Sustainability Office, led by the SAF's Chief of Staff Joint Staff, has convened an external panel comprising experts to provide insights on implementation plans to meet our sustainability targets. Members have asked for update. Let me give some. By end of this year, about a quarter of SAF camps will have solar panels installed, to deliver 20 megawatt peak of electricity. This is equivalent to the consumption of about 5,000 four-room households. By 2025, it will jump from a quarter to have 2/3 of our camps generate 50 megawatt peak of electricity. Smart metering systems will also be installed to track electricity and water consumption automatically, starting with Jurong Camp, Paya Lebar Air Base, and Changi Naval Base. The RSAF has commenced trials for the use of green fuel for its F-16 Fighting Falcons. These efforts and others will help us meet our emission targets by 2030. I'm thankful that members of this House have supported our budget each year. On MINDEF's and the SAF's part, our responsibility is to spend prudently and effectively to build strong national defense, as I've detailed. But it's gratifying to me, and to members here too, that the SAF is a national asset to deploy in situations like the current COVID-19 pandemic. When Singapore experienced a resurgence of cases due to Delta or Omicron variants, MINDEF and the SAF personnel were called upon to assist MOH, to provide operations planning capabilities, contact tracing, call centers, or to man emergency departments. The SAF also stood up the Home Recovery Task Group to better manage the home recovery programs for patients. And NSmen also helped as home vaccination teams and mobile vaccination teams. Our defense scientists and engineers contributed a variety of support systems. Members have asked how do we help overseas, and indeed we did, beyond Singapore shores. Last year, the SAF's Changi Regional Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief Coordination Center coordinated the transfer of medical equipment and supplies to regional countries worst hit by COVID-19, including the shipment of over 500 tons of oxygen at Indonesia's request as part of the Oxygen Shuttle program. Mr. Chairman, let me thank members of the House for their steadfast commitment and support for a robust national defense through a strong SAF. This year, particularly because of the events in Ukraine, I think Singaporeans needed less convincing that it's our collective responsibility to keep Singapore safe and secure for ourselves and successive generations. So we were pleasantly pleased that others were saying the right things on behalf of MINDEF and SAF, and for their own convictions, of course. But I think salutary lessons have sunk in. And indeed, some Singaporeans send me emails. Let me just quote from two of them. One is from Mr. T. K.H. Quote, I used to take my in-camp training as a holiday camp till I realized how important it is to defend Singapore when Iraq invaded tiny Kuwait. Now a retiree and from the Merdeka generation, I reminded my son, who is serving NS, to take his training seriously. The greater the force of dutiful citizens who are actively serving their country, defending the weak, fighting for freedom, and doing what is right, the better chance that wars will end quickly and the less chance wars will even begin. Unquote. The second is from Mr. Ching. Quote, if Singaporeans don't defend our country, nobody will help us. I am 67, a retired NS-man, but as long as I am fit, I will not hesitate to don my uniform again to help my fellow Singaporeans to defend our country. This is my country, my home, and soil. As long as we have Singaporeans who share the deep resolve and conviction that Mr. T and Mr. Ching share, then I say our future remains secure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr.
SMS Zaki Mohammed.
Mr. Chairman, may I seek your consent
Yes.
to move that progress be reported now and leave be asked again to sit tomorrow?
I give my consent.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that progress be reported now and leave be asked to sit again tomorrow.
The question is that progress be reported now and leave be asked to sit again tomorrow. As many as are of the opinion say aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Minister.
Mr. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to report that the Committee of Supply has made progress on the estimates of expenditure for the financial year 2022 and 2023 and ask leave to sit again tomorrow.
So be it. Deputy Leader.
So, Deputy Speaker, on behalf of Leader, I beg to move that Parliament do now adjourn to 10:30 a.m. tomorrow.
The question is that Parliament do now adjourn to 10:30 a.m. tomorrow. As many as are of that opinion say aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.